What's happening, everybody? My name is Justin and welcome back to our BTR garage. Today we're going to be chopping up my BMW 325 IS. We have Hard Motorsports fender flares we're going to be slapping onto this thing, and that means we got to break out some power tools and start cutting away these fenders to get them installed. I'm going to show you what we've got, the tools that you're going to need, and get started. All right, so Hard Motorsports fender flares, what do they look like? Basically, they look like this. It's an oversized fender cover, basically, that goes onto the body of the car, and you more or less have to fit them onto the car like that, trace an outline of where they go, and then cut the metal of the fender off appropriately. What this allows for is a larger wheel and tire combination. Since I have larger Apex Arc 8s and larger tires to put on the car, I need a little bit more fender coverage to keep the tires within the body. Now you're gonna need an assortment of tools to get this job done. It's not terribly difficult, it takes a little bit of time, but if you have the right tool, it goes pretty quick. What you don't wanna use is one of these, basically an angle grinder with a cutting wheel on it. This is not the type of tool you want to use for cutting auto body metal. While it does work, it's super messy, it's super loud and obnoxious, and it doesn't make a very clean cut. Instead, we have a couple of other tools that are meant to cut metal. So this is a small little reciprocating type saw that has a metal cutting blade on it made specifically for cutting sheet metal and auto body metal, and then a standard old jigsaw which has a metal cutting blade on it as well. These are the types of tools you want to use when cutting metal body parts like what we have on the car. In addition to that stuff, you're gonna want some white masking tape. I like to put this over the body of the car so we have a clean trace of where we're gonna cut. You're gonna need a rivet tool because the fenders are held on by rivets. You're gonna need a drill, of course, to drill the hole for the rivets that attach the fender flares to the car. And of course, you want your safety equipment, some safety glasses, and some gloves as well, and even a little bit of auto body paint to spray over the exposed metal edges when we do cut the fender off. So that's basically all of the tools you need. Seems like a lot, but it's pretty simple, pretty basic stuff. We're gonna go ahead and tape up the fender here, trace out where the flare goes, and start cutting away. All right, once the fender flare is mocked up into place, we're gonna go ahead and trace out the outline of the flare. And once we're done tracing it out, we can go ahead and pull the fender flare off and see what our outline looks like. Finish up the trace. Now, one key thing to note right here is this is not the line that we're gonna cut on. If we were to cut here, we'd have no material left to rivet the fender flare into. So what we're gonna do is actually go down about an inch below this line. That'll give us enough room to have plastic from the fender flare itself to rivet in there. So I'm gonna take my fender flare, the tape off of it, and kind of use it as a guide to trace a new line, which is the one we'll use to cut. All right, so now we have established our cutting line. That's the lower line on the trace here. So we're gonna grab our power tools and start chopping away. The way I like to do it is kind of start in the middle and slowly make a curve into the cutting line, do one side, and then go back on the other side and go in the other direction. All right, so we're good to go. You'll notice I put a towel over my brake rotor and the components in the wheel well, and also a little carpet down on the floor. Maybe you can't see it, but basically to help catch metal shavings and things like that, just makes it easier to clean up. You can vacuum it versus having to sweep everything. So got my jigsaw, got a new blade. Let's get to cutting. All right, the first section is cut off. It's like cutting through butter. The jigsaw just tears right through it. Literally only takes a few seconds. So So we have that off, and one thing I forgot to mention that you'll probably want to do is drop your fender liner as well. I kind of cut a little bit of mine, which isn't a big deal. You can take 2 of the bolts out on the underside of the fender well, and then just drop the plastic fender liner down so it's out of the way and you don't cut the crap out of it. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next section and get the rest of it cut off here. All right, so the cutting is done, made quick work of those fenders. We got a nice clean cut line around the fender well. The next thing we have to do is grab the fender flare itself, start drilling out all of the holes, and the Hard Motorsports flares have little dimples where all of the rivets are supposed to go. So what I usually do is drill those out beforehand, and then we'll go mock it back up on the fender again and tape it down with tape, and then start drilling all the holes for the rivets so we can mount it in place. And I almost forgot, before we do that even, we're gonna take the tape off and just shoot this bare metal edge with a little bit of spray paint. You can use some touch-up paint, anything that just covers it up so it's not exposed metal, otherwise it'll rust eventually. All right, so we have everything mocked back up on the car, taped into place, and we're pretty much ready to start drilling the holes and setting some of the rivets. Now on my car, these fender flares are made for an M3 body, so they have a little bit wider piece or structure down here on the bottom that's meant to fit the larger trim piece on the M3. The M3 has like a thick trim piece that's kind of flat, whereas this car, it's narrower and sticks out farther. So I had to modify this a little bit, cut some notches out of it to make it sit flush up against the body. It kind of looks crappy, but I'll figure out a way to, I don't know, maybe cover it up when we wrap the car or something like that. So we're gonna grab the drill, start popping holes through here, and you wanna make sure when you get to this point as well that you kind of feel underneath and make sure there's enough metal for the rivet hole to be drilled through. So you don't wanna have, of course, the metal stopping like in the middle of the hole. You wanna make sure it's lined up just right so there is enough metal underneath the flare there. So all around mine checks out pretty good, and plenty of metal behind the holes to drill and then put in the rivets. So let's get started with that part. You really want to make sure that this stays in place when you're drilling all of the holes, so kind of double check things as you go. All right, all the holes have been drilled, all the rivets have been put into place. Now we can start tying in the rivets, which will lock the fender flare into place. So what I do is kind of start on opposite ends and start working my way back and forth just to make sure nothing gets out of whack. So we'll kind of start at the top, move down to another end, and kind of repeat that process. All right, the first fender is done. This thing is solid and in place. It isn't going anywhere. It's kind of crazy how stiff these things get once they actually get riveted down to the car. So with this one in place, I'm gonna clean up my mess down here and then go ahead and move on to the rear, get that one done, and we should be set. All right, so the rear fender is now cut, And I'll admit it's quite a bit harder than the front. The front was a piece of cake when it came to cutting the fender. The rear, on the other hand, is quite a bit more difficult, and this side gave me a lot more trouble than the other side did. The other side went pretty smooth, but on this side I broke 3 blades on my jigsaw and had to use the second blade on my smaller tool. What makes this side more difficult is underneath the fender well here, there's actually another 2 layers of metal all the way up the inside of the fender well. So you're going through multiple layers of metal, and they're kind of spread apart. They're not like right on top of each other. So one is seated back a little bit further in the fender well, and when the blade was going through there, it just wouldn't go deep enough, and it was bouncing off the layers in the back. So it's kind of tricky to get that done. Ideally, you want to have like 4 or 5 inch long blades on your jigsaw. It would make getting through that rear panel a lot easier. But we did get it done. It took a little bit of extra time, got it prepped up and hammered up the underlying metal pieces into the front fender. So the cut is not quite as clean or not quite as nice, but it'll do, and we're gonna go ahead and get the fender flare on there now. All right, everybody, there we go. We've got the Hard Motorsports fender flares installed on the car. Everything looks pretty sweet. The fitment was pretty dang good. I had to do a little bit of cutting and customizing to get these to fit my non-M 325IS. For the BMW M3, they would probably fit a little bit better. I wouldn't have to cut the notches in on the back sides of the wheel well on the front, and then the front of the wheel well on the rear where that little trim piece fits in down the side of the car. But otherwise fit pretty good. They're rock solid once they're on here, and should be pretty good. We'll be able to fit the bigger wheels and tires and go faster as a result. So I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you guys have any thoughts, comments, or questions, please leave them down below like usual. Stick around, we still have more stuff to do to the car. Unfortunately, since it's still in a bunch of pieces and parts are missing, there's no suspension on the car. As you can see, I can't get it on the ground and put the wheels on and show a little bit of a fitment showcase, but we'll get to that here in the near future. Next up should be the MCS suspension that I've got sitting back here on the bench. I think that is the last thing we have to do before this thing is track worthy again, so stick around for that. We'll catch you guys soon. Stay fast out there. I am checking out. We'll talk to you all next time.